can see what the kind of thing we're thinking of as suitable to send to a politician to try and get some interest from governments.
John, the one thing I thought was missing was the abstract. You mentioned that it occurred someplace else, but I didn't see it attached. Maybe that was an oversight, but I think an abstract would be great.
Okay, abstract.
I think you mentioned it in the email, and I didn't see it attached. So it's probably a separate document.
Yeah, I attached, at least I hope I attached letter to Starmer V3. Is that what you got?
Well, what I read was the 17 pager, 16 pager, and the email that forwarded that mentioned an abstract. Also attached was the diagram.
Oh, right. So we're talking at cross purposes.
Oh, okay.
That email, that document was sent some time ago, like last, well, a few days ago. Whereas I've just sent you something called the letter to Starmer version 3 about 10 minutes ago on this thread.
I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah.
Are you talking in the chat, John?
Not the chat, no, on the thread, on the email thread, which had the URL for this meeting. It was called
Oh, it's attached to the one with the agenda.
Yeah.
Short agenda. It's at the bottom of the agenda.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at that.
Have you got that, Robert? It may be difficult to go back to your email from Zoom.
So is the agenda to discuss this short memo or the long 16 pager?
Well, we can go through the agenda items if you like. I should have made a list of them, shouldn't I? The first one was the kind of moral, the moral case.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing, arguments that we could put to church leaders, perhaps. It's really to counter the moral objections that have been raised to the kind of necessary technology that we're going to have to use, such as putting sulfate aerosol into the stratosphere might be necessary. Hopefully we could do things which are more obviously benign, like Stephen Salter's marine cloud brightening, or using phytoplankton to produce DMS. But until we've got some good modeling to show that that would be sufficient to cool the Arctic, I think we have to assume that stratospheric aerosol will have to be used. And at least we should be preparing for that. So we need to prepare emotionally, because there's huge emotion against putting SO2 into the stratosphere.
John, just to insert, I think the first page of the 16 pager, the first page to me was the moral imperative. First page and a few sentences on the second page sort of encapsulates the urgency. The technical part, yeah, that would have to be dealt with, but the moral case, I think that That did it for me, that one page.
Okay, I'm just making a note of that. And so, do we have any contacts here? Oh, Andrew's arrived. Hello, Andrew.
Hello there.
We were going to pursue a Faith Invest as a possible route into drawing attention to the kind of moral predicament we are in. That's what's needed to be done. Probably needed to be done to prevent the climate emergency getting worse. Is likely to involve something which is considered immoral, i.e. putting a toxic substance known as sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. By the way, somebody's producing rather a lot of noise. I don't know. Paper noise. It's gone silent. Good. Right. So I think the third item on the agenda was writing to politicians, or it might have been writing a white paper. No, white paper I think was the last on the agenda. Has everybody got the agenda in front of them? Because I don't.
No, sorry.
So never mind. So we've tried writing a letter suitable for politicians, and I would like some more feedback. And also we need to get started in sending it off, deciding who we could send it to and writing it and sending it off. I've sent you the draft as far as we got to a month ago, and that's so that's attached to an email sent about 15 minutes ago, and on this thread. At the start of it, I suggested that I didn't kind of try and contradict what the body of scientists are saying, which is that we should reduce our CO2 emissions. I've just said that we need to be more ambitious. Up till now, the possibility of climate restoration hasn't been considered as a feasible option. But now we've proved that it is a feasible option. We should go for it. And that's the basis of the letter. So it's not confronting the scientists for spreading false information, which I think they have, but it's saying what can now be done, and hoping to get support for planetary restoration, basically, from government, at least their support. If it's not, it may not be financial, but if it's agreed that this is what the international community should be gunning for, then that would be positive. And we're too late for the G7 meeting that's taking place in the next few days, but at least we can try and get something on the agenda for COP26.
That'd be good.
Ron.
Oh, so I thank you very much for this. I agree with Doug that this paper you sent out was excellent, as well as the graph here. I mean, I was actually quite surprised at the SO2 emissions effect, and somehow I would think that that would be good to incorporate in the draft. Reducing fossil fuel emissions could actually warm the planet, have a perverse effect. I also wanted to suggest. I mean, I made a kind of Don Quixote-ish effort to appeal to the drafters of the draft IPC AR6. I got myself in as an expert reviewer and sent out an appeal. But of course, I'm not the right person. I'm an economist, and I'm wondering if among this group and other groups of people that are known in the field as climate scientists, if some kind of a petition or something to the COP, what is it now, 2026, or the drafters of the AR6 or something of that nature, signed by a large number of well-known people in the field would be a good way to raise the issue and kind of pressure some kind of international action. Government action is convene a group to address, I call it triage or geoengineering, the imperative for emergency action.
Okay. Yes, that's a petition would be good. I'm not sure we can get many signatories to that particular idea of that the IPCC is quite as wrong as we suggest. So we're actually trying not to confront too much and rather try and embrace what they're doing as being contributing to the problem. So I wrote something to not to our group but to the CDR group. I don't know if are you on the CDR group? Well, I suggested yeah. I suggested that the trouble with emissions reduction is it was inadequate and inadequate response. So it's not saying it's useless or wrong or misguided or anything. It's just inadequate. And I said, well, that's for Plan A. Then the Plan A is decarbonisation. Plan B, we realise that that is not going to happen quickly enough, so we've got to do some CO2 removal. So that and some methane suppression as well. So that's Plan B, and then we need SRM cooling. It could be our Plan C. And that is more urgent than the CDR. The CDR is more urgent than the complete decarbonisation, which is probably pie in the sky anyway. SRM is for cooling the planet and well, cooling enough to refreeze the Arctic is how I put it. And then Plan D, if we can get that, if we can save the Arctic sea ice that way, then we can have our Plan D, which embraces everything and gets the planet back to the norms of the late Holocene, i.e. pre-industrial norms. So that's a possible way of picturing the scene of the planet action as being a succession of plans that actually can all proceed in parallel, quite comfortably in parallel. They don't have to. There's no contradiction. People don't need to feel that the efforts to reduce their carbon footprints are wasted. Although we can point out, and Robert has pointed out, that these contributions are minuscule in relation to the whole problem.
I just put out the
I've said enough now, so over to somebody else.
May I put a word in edgewise, please?
Yeah.
So I have been in email contact with Dr. Ye Tao, whom you might know. I believe he did at one point attend maybe when it was a polar restoration group, action group meeting. I think he attended one of the meetings. I understand now it's the Planet Restoration Action Group. And so I don't know if any of you have had time to visit the MEER, MEER, which stands for Mirrors for Earth's Energy Rebalancing Reflection website. I can put it in the chat if anyone is interested. And the proposal of Mirrors for Earth's Energy Rebalancing is to use surface-placed glass mirrors to cool the planet. And according to Dr. Ye's calculations, he is a physicist. I am just a mere PhD biologist. So it's basically a thermodynamic problem. And at the moment, as if I recollect correctly from the latest information that I read, there's about a 0.9 watts per meter excess incoming solar radiation. If the all fossil fuel burning was to cease today, then we would lose the global dimming, the parasol that has been protecting and cooling the Earth. And that would be an additional 1.2 watts per square meter of heating. The way that Dr. Ye likes to explain this thermodynamic problem is as a scale. So incoming radiation in the past has equaled outgoing radiation, and we have had a stable planetary Gaia, or however you want to talk about our planet, with ice ages coming and going, but within a very narrow range of temperatures and carbon dioxide concentrations. And he has an excellent slide if you have a chance to look at one of his talks, which shows carbon dioxide versus temperature over millennia from, the scientists that have been taking ice bubbles out of ancient glacial ice and other ways of measuring these. And he has it color coded so that the most recent 100 years are in a different color. And it is just, you cannot avoid the conclusion that man is responsible for this. Not that I need to convince any of you here, because I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it is such a useful graphic if you ever need anything to convince anyone who is, unsure about it. But Dr. Ye's worry, and well, according to his calculations, even if we had ceased carbon dioxide production in 2005, we would still need to have some sort of solar radiation management due to the thermal inertia of the Earth. And his suggestion is for surface-placed glass mirrors, which they're non-toxic. We don't have to worry about blocking incoming solar radiation, which we need to grow our food. And so I would just like to sort of bring this into the discussion, because I know all of you have researched extensively about stratospheric aerosol injection, marine cloud brightening, and maybe other forms of solar radiation management. I did read recently in The Guardian that a amazing white, extremely white paint has been invented that will reflect 98% of the incoming solar radiation. So this might be also a useful tool. But the problem with trying to cover, I think it's 2%, 1 to 2% of the Earth's surface, that is land mass, would need to be covered with either mirrors or this extremely white paint in order to reflect back enough radiation just to counteract, I think, just exceeding the existing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And obviously we have a legacy. The greenhouse gases are not going to disappear overnight. At the moment, we are slowly, preventing more from, well, the curve is slow, but eventually we will peak and then have to draw them down. The other argument that Dr. Ye makes is that it is energetically impossible to take carbon dioxide out of the air using direct air capture because there is entropy involved. It's a three-dimensional problem. If you mix salt and pepper together, then you have to separate them out. So his idea is to use solar, concentrating solar power to break down limestone into carbon dioxide, which is concentrated and can be used for all sorts of things, sequestered, turned into goodness knows what. And then the calcium oxide can be slaked and used to line the oceans, which will reduce the carbon dioxide in the oceans. And also, since the oceans are basically a free carbon dioxide absorber, then they will absorb carbon dioxide from the air. So we can reduce both the atmospheric and the oceanic carbon dioxide using that method. And the other great thing about mirrors is they are great for making electricity and for using capturing solar radiation to turn it into all sorts of useful energy for mankind to hopefully use wisely. So sorry, thank you. That was my spiel.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. I have read up on Mir, and
thank you, John.
I
gave you a baked potato analogy.
Yes.
You were kind enough to. I don't know if you.
No, it was a joke I couldn't resist.
Well, I thought it was great. So may I have a moment more to talk about my baked potato?
I just want to say that what I would really appreciate if Ye could comment, Ye Tao could comment on the graph that Doug Grandt and I produced. Because that is highlighting that I don't actually put it as the 1.2 watts per square meter, but effectively the SO2, if we didn't have the SO2, the warming would be about 50% greater.
Yes.
So it's the current rate of warming, which people don't know. It's not acknowledged by IPCC, but it's there in the figures. We're warming at a rate of 0.25 degrees per decade.
Yes.
Now the current global mean temperature is somewhere around 1.2. So you can do some arithmetic and realize we're going to get to 1.5 degrees in just over a decade. If everything stands still,
which it won't.
If our emissions. So well, so long as we keep our SO2 emissions going. So there is a huge problem if we decarbonize and remove this SO2 dimming. So we've got to think about having very strong solar radiation management techniques. And mirrors is one way of doing it, and there are other ways. That there's marine cloud brightening, and there's stratospheric aerosol injection. The trouble is we don't know. The modelers haven't told us just how much we need in order to ensure that the Arctic starts to refreeze. And it's not at all obvious by looking at the AMOC, the meridian overturning circulation. Do you know what the AMOC is?
Yes. Yes, I know. The Gulf Stream.
Well, that's the main observation you can on the retreating ice, which you could see very, if you look at an animation over the last 20 years or so of the from the satellite data, images of the sea ice extent, you can see it. There's a kind of pulsing going on, and there's injection of Atlantic water into the Arctic and from the Pacific, and that's pulsing in each summer. It pulses in and gets a bit further, and that seems to be the major driving of the loss of sea ice at the moment. So how do you deal with that? Well, you can try just refreezing the Arctic itself by thickening the sea ice, for example, is one method. Increasing its reflectivity with floating glass microbeads is another possibility. But that's not going to stop this water coming in, which is warm and it's saline and warm, or warmer than it has been in the past. And sometimes the surface temperatures reached up to 22 degrees in one spot.
Yes.
Which is frighteningly anomalous.
So,
so something more global is going to be required to cool all the surface water flowing into the Arctic. And the question is how much surface water is flowing into the Arctic to do this. So how much cooling power do we need? And nobody's done that calculation that I know, because we've had a go, and we've got a range between 1% of a petawatt and 1 petawatt. So we're 2 orders of magnitude out difference in estimates.
So I did share that with Dr. Tao, your graph, and I did share the conversation that we had at the Healthy Climate Alliance meeting on Saturday, and he was unable to attend today, but he did say that freezing the polar regions are important and necessary, but doomed without global cooling efforts, since the majority of solar radiation hits Earth at the equatorial regions. So that led me to my, excuse me, this is a very poor analogy, but having campfires, my analogy with children, my analogy was to a round skewered potato over a campfire that you were rotating. And if you're trying to prevent the ends, your polar regions, from getting hot, then it will not do any good covering them with aluminum foil, because the heat is still flowing from the equatorial, from the middle part of the potato, which is receiving most of the campfire heat. And it reminded me of the first and second laws of thermodynamics, as in the Flanders and Swan song, heat can't pass from a cooler to a hotter. You can try it if you like, but you far better not. So I'm sorry, this is like basic thermodynamics. Sorry.
Anyhow, you caused me great amusement, because I did listen to that. It's very good. But we are proposing for climate restoration that we will going to need. We need to have some cooling as well. So we haven't forgotten that. It's absolutely necessary if we want to halt sea level rise, because the ocean is expansion.
Yes.
That's a global warming issue, as opposed to the Arctic warming. The problem about the Arctic is the Arctic amplification, which reduces the gradient from between the polar regions and the tropical regions. And that reduction in the gradient has reduced the stability of our climate system, and we're getting weather extremes in the northern hemisphere as a result. The
greater the temperature difference, the greater the amount of heat flow.
Yeah, but the problem is the climate change. Well, the main problem is the climate change. If you want to reverse climate change, then you've got to change that gradient, basically.
Yes.
So we can change that gradient by simply cooling the Arctic. But the trouble is, we're still fighting against this sea ice disappearing, which is going to heating the Arctic.
Well, if you cool the Arctic without cooling the equatorial regions, the heat flow from the equatorial regions will be even greater, since the temperature difference will be greater.
Yes, but that's a linear effect, whereas the radiative forcing, if we can do that in the winter in the poles, is, I believe, a fourth power effect in terms of the black body radiation. So we proposed some interventions that directly build sea ice using a marine permaculture upwelling method and wind power. And it's our understanding that if we can do that, coupled with increased radiative forcing during the winter nighttime, that can increase the heat sink to a 3 degree Kelvin background. So there can be a substantial change with a combination of our penetrometer approach to building sea ice, coupled with I would say tropospheric aerosols to improve radiative forcing into space based on the 3 degree Kelvin background in the nighttime winter in the poles.
So, Brian, so the idea of thickening sea ice in the winter is that it would you'd be actually increasing the infrared radiation.
I think the idea would be, first of all, we have a basis for each device could potentially increase sea ice thickness approaching 10 meters in each square kilometer per unit. Once that's done, then of course that is a black body radiator. And of course, if we can encourage or somehow facilitate the removing some of the cloud cover in the wintertime, that's going to, the low cloud cover, this tropospheric cloud cover, that enables a much more radiation to escape into space, thus addressing any latent heat of condensation or freezing that occurs associated with the production of all the sea ice. So you get 10 meters of sea ice in the winter. you're able to radiate the excess latent heat into space and be prepared for an entirely white summer in the Arctic once this is done at scale.
Right. Have we got any modeling on this?
Mm.
Or do we just have any engineering estimates that we could put into a paper?
These are engineering estimates, and I'd be happy to contribute to such a paper. I believe that we've got a base for both ocean deployed and aircraft deployed systems that could accumulate many meters of sea ice per winter, and we can run those calculations based on reasonable temperature differences, reasonable water flows, and reasonable condensation rates or freezing rates.
Now, Stephen Salter did have some considerable anxiety about sea ice thickening because you'd be releasing a huge amount of latent heat.
Yes, exactly. And that concern is completely addressed by increasing the radiation into space. That's most easily done by seeding tropospheric clouds. That could be done with any of a variety of aerosols. But we studied tropospheric aerosols under America's Climate Choices at the National Academy of Sciences starting in 2010. They've been underutilized, but effectively there are a variety of aerosols that will seed the clouds, enable them to drop out, and that will increase the long wave radiation into space during the winter when it's dark and you've got a 3-degree Kelvin background.
That's good.
Okay, I think this ought to go into the added to the 16-page document because that document assumed there was a problem with getting rid of the latent heat and the possibility of cloud seeding is mentioned in the paper but not highlighted in the way that you've suggested, because that sounds like the answer to the problem of cooling the Arctic itself. I think we still need to have the global cooling.
Mm-hmm. One of the nice things about the sulfate approach, tropospheric sulfate timescales are only 2 weeks, so it's a bit of a no regret scenario in the sense that you're not committing for 2 years of sulfates in the atmosphere, but it's just 2 weeks. And ironically, some of the older fossil fuel in the Arctic was producing plenty of sulfates. So it's a rather ironic situation, but one that correlates with your temperature curve. And I think it's worth mentioning that some of those high sulfate emissions could actually be facilitating in the radiation into space. So happy to assist in developing the engineering framework behind this.
So how would your sulfates be helping it? Are they acting as cloud seeding?
I believe so. I've got to double check, but yes, effectively. I've got to check the seasonality on this as well. But we can check the literature. Of course, there's a half a century of literature on the cloud seeding approach, and we can identify the proper set of ingredients that would help to reduce tropospheric stratus clouds that would otherwise be blocking some of the long wave radiation into space.
So one of the things I've established with Doug McMartin is that SO2 injected into the stratosphere north of 60 degrees north, i.e. basically in the Arctic,
yes,
would have a cooling effect and would avoid all the known problems with SO2 stratospheric aerosol.
Agreed. Yeah, and we should I should double check the summer versus winter radiative forcing with and without cloud cover, but I'm sure we can find the right combination that'll increase long wave radiation into space in the winter. and it's mainly
Mm.
about eliminating clouds that would otherwise be a blanket.
What I've not established with Doug McMartin is that stratospheric aerosol might have a heating effect through if it blocks infrared the thermal outgoing radiation at all.
That's a good
Because-
question. I think we should also look at the effect of stratospheric and tropospheric aerosols on cloud seeding and whether it increases or decreases cloud cover, because that would be relevant to this analysis as well.
So how do we progress this rapidly, Brian? Can you send me some?
Yeah, I can send some engineering calculations. I think it would be helpful to have someone in our group look at the body of literature on cloud seeding, and then there's been plenty of analysis that we could review on radiative forcing and tropospheric clouds and stratospheric clouds, particularly stratus.
There's David Mitchell. Do you know him?
Not offhand.
He's done a lot of work on cirrus cloud removal.
Very good.
So he's somebody who could help us talk, I think, quite a lot.
If you could send an introductory email, we could perhaps follow up.
Yeah.
That'd be excellent. Thank you.
Right. Okay.
The reason I'm so encouraged by this is that if we do make 10 meters of sea ice in the spring, then we could probably withstand some really brutal summers and still retain a high reflection. So it would be a very strong superlinear forcing factor.
Yeah. The one place one would like to do this is across the Fram Strait when it's frozen, and create some kind of a bit of an ice barrier there.
Yes, those ice bridges would be excellent, and of course the right kind of ice can be very strong in compression. We also are producing a lot of bamboo in the tropics, and I just mentioned it because whether it's sawdust or bamboo, there are various ways of strengthening ice as a composite material, because it has some problems in tension. But it's possible that bamboo ice would create an ice bridge that might be far more resilient than an ice structure alone. And of course, bamboo is a weed, so it grows very quickly as a C4 grass.
Yeah. I had in fact considered making blocks of ice and strengthening their perimeters with bamboo. That was because I thought that trying to make pykrete, which is this reinforced ice, would be quite an expensive thing to do.
If we actually got
huge volume, but if you put the bamboo around the edges, you can protect the edges from being scuffed up by moving ice, and make blocks, and then you can join the blocks together, for example, in a hexagonal fashion.
That's true.
Although we're thinking hexagons.
Even raw bamboo timbers embedded in large ice, formations can likely be quite good in terms of tensile members within the composite ice tensile member composite. So forming ice bridges that way could be very helpful.
Yeah, so we could have some longitudinal members as well as and use the ice for the compressional side.
In fact, just shipping bamboo up there and freezing it into the ice would be a crude form that doesn't require a lot of manufacturing.
If we use ice blocks, we could have them made as a kind of cottage industry in places all around the Arctic, and then float them into position.
Yes, I'm
when
actually considering that at some scale, we've estimated for a couple 100 kilowatt wind turbine that it could probably freeze a square kilometer of ice area. And you could literally lay out the bamboo timbers across that kilometer and form kilometer scale blocks.
So you could form blocks in situ perhaps, but I was thinking of prefabrication possibility and towing the blocks into place when the sea ice is gone, and create your bridge structure, and then during the winter you could fill in the gaps.
Yeah, be good to review the transport costs, and happy to explore that.
Yeah. So let's pursue this one, because I'd rather given up hope of attracting any interest for the bamboo idea or the block idea.
Very well.
And certainly I hope somebody would bring up the cloud seeding, because I think that's the breakthrough. The other thing about increasing snow is that if we could do that on the Greenland ice sheet, we can redress the mass balance. If we did it vigorously enough, we could actually make Greenland a negative contributor to sea level rise.
Good point. Yeah, I think a key question would be our ability to increase precipitation over Greenland. They get snow year round just about, and if there was a way to facilitate that, we could start accumulating more ice in the center and enable that to turn around.
Yeah. Peter Wadhams and I were discussing this, because there was a development, a recent research development. Well, I mean, I don't mean a development of something, but a useful research done on satellite images of glaciers, where they studied literally thousands of glaciers by analyzing satellite images and deducing how much they are retreating. They may be also combined with gravimetric data, but I don't know about that. But certainly they've established that the ice mass loss has doubled in 20 years.
Yes, along those lines, I think there's an interesting trend towards steepening in Greenland, and that is, I'm expecting there might be more moisture and more snow at the higher elevations approaching 10,000 feet, but the borders are definitely retreating and getting smaller. So the steepening will also increase the gradient, but ultimately we have the best chance of piling on a bunch of snow and ice near the higher regions. The
encouraging observation, one of the observations, was that the rate of thinning on the east side of Greenland had reduced. So the general trend was for it to, the thinning rate to increase, I double every 20 years, in 20 years. But there has been a slowdown of this thinning on the east of Greenland, they think due to increased precipitation. So that's encouraging. So one of the kind of negative feedback effects of having more exposed ocean in the Arctic is greater moisture contact, and therefore more tendency for precipitation.
Yes.
And if we do ice thickening, as you suggest, that will put a lot of water vapor into the atmosphere. And if we can then take it out and get it to snow, some of it will radiate into space,
right,
and some of it will come out as snow. which will then allow more outgoing thermal radiation. So I think we're onto a winning tactic here.
I would suggest a snow seeding program over the highland regions of Greenland.
Mm.
Could be done out of Thule Air Force Base in northwestern Greenland as well.
Yeah, I'm just making a note of that. That's brilliant. Right, deep breath. Any other comments?
If I could just, so one of the things that I was struck by was the sense in which this siloization between the climate scientists and the social scientists, and I'm wondering if, because my perception is in the climate science community, it's people are quite well aware of the Arctic tipping point and the dangers that it poses. But in the social science community, people are focused on carbon removal and emissions reductions and these kind of economic changes. And I'm wondering if some of these what the gap that I believe that I'm seeing is that a government body, we need some official body to take this on. We can't do things in Greenland or wherever, anywhere in the Arctic. I probably need, international agreement. We need the social action component. And that's where I thought, appealing to policymakers, of course, public opinion, of course, but some kind of more direct appeal to the current international governing bodies that look, this is a critical emergency. We need to act rapidly and fast, and just convene a group of experts to address all these different techniques, and weigh in on which ones would be or use many of them. But
one person who has a track record of doing this in the past is Sir David King, who had some of the instrumental role during the 2015 Paris Accords of actually getting those accords to completion. So I'm interested in bringing this topic to Sir David King in the context of seeking an Arctic treaty, and the Arctic Treaty would focus on the $2 billion opportunity for the Panama Canal of the Arctic. And that would be a $2 billion per year revenue stream, 10 or 15% of which those revenues could be directed towards sea ice thickening and towards even Greenland precipitation. So that could be a several $100 million per year budget for pursuing such an effort, at the same time producing net positive revenues for the Arctic countries that would do this. So I'm interested in meeting with Sir David King on this topic and seeing if we could progress that political objective starting this quarter.
It would be quite difficult for you to travel. Would it, Brian, or can you travel?
I can travel throughout Australia. We've got a bit of a bubble here, maybe New Zealand, but I would say, we're very happy doing this online. So I met just in the last couple of weeks with Sir David King, and would encourage an online development of this nature this quarter, starting this quarter.
I'll see if I can get a message to Sir David that he'll respond to.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I'm in touch with his group, and so it's quite likely we could meet with them later this month to advance this topic.
Perhaps I could get some help from Peter Wadhams here, because he's I think he's helping in Sir David's group, aren't you, Peter, or about to? Yeah, you're muted. Peter, you're muted.
Yeah. Yes, I'm about to become sort of part-time with him, yes, but whilst remaining in
Good.
during the rest of the time.
I think this idea of some kind of Arctic treaty is brilliant, and we ought to bring in the president of Iceland, who is very keen on to be trying at least trying some methods of cooling in the Arctic.
I agree. I think that would be excellent. And
Yeah.
you know, there's a revenue to be made for everyone, and you know, it probably is a good motivator that would bring some of these folks together, and maybe even Russia is game if there's revenue involved.
What you mentioned this new Panama Canal as the source of this revenue. Is that can you expand on what
Yes.
what that would be, where it would be?
Yes. Over the past year or two, I've designed an approach that I think will be sustainable. The current revenues of the Panama Canal are approximately $2 billion per year. And using similar economics, we could argue for that revenue or larger if several things are done. We would establish a year-round, perhaps, canal that could pass through the Arctic and enable China's access to Europe. There are other routes, of course, as well. And this system would be kept ice-free, and it would have actually a system of locks that would enable the passage and the separation of the canal, so it wouldn't be collapsed the way polynyas are collapsed with adverse winds. So we have a framework in place that would enable this to occur. We believe that construction could be done in just a few short years with an appropriate amount of sea ice thickening, and that we would enable large container class ships to transit through this channel in a way completely analogous to the Panama Canal, but probably facilitating the larger ships that cannot pass today through the canal through such an architecture. So it could be a multiple of the $2 billion could actually be realized given the amount of shipping that would be needed or desired.
Interesting.
Yeah, with a suitable tax, you know, 10 or 15% or something, I think we could probably pay for much of this program.
Brilliant. Okay. I see we've got somebody, perhaps a few people who've not been here before. So before we do any wind up, and normally we go on till about for another half hour. Is that all right for everybody?
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave. It's late for the.
If anybody needs to leave soon, please can they raise any questions, or if they haven't introduced themselves, please introduce yourself. I'm looking at Matt now. Matt Weldon. I don't think I know you.
No, this is the first such meeting I've attended. I've participated in the Healthy Climate Alliance log. I don't know what to call it, the online efforts there for quite some time, but I've always been a rather passive participant. My educational background is in chemical engineering in the semiconductor arena. Did a career cycle on that. My current touch point on energy issues is I serve on the Electric Utility Commission for the city of Austin. And Austin as a city is, I would say, more aggressive than the majority of cities on the topic of climate change. And one of my claims to fame is that we just instituted carbon pricing just at the municipal level. And that was pretty successful, SO2 issues aside, in that over the space of 1 year, we reduced emissions for the city by a third at pretty astoundingly low cost. But as a city, I've been thinking about how we can add to Austin Energy's purviews and duties, CDR and more expansive view of what an energy utility must do especially when it's a municipal utility and we're talking about issues of the commons.
That's brilliant. In that context, it's quite difficult to see how our discussions on saving the Arctic sea ice are relevant.
No,
But,
to me, because to me, it's about price. It's just how much does it cost to do what? As I really liked how you framed it. It's like we should be talking about Plan D, which is how much of A, B, and C do we do, and in what order and with what rapidity. And so to me, those are just all engineering projects. And then it's just a question of how do you finance them and who does it? And, municipalities are kind of the place where we typically have traditionally done large scale, sewage management, for example, it's kind of the same scale. It's the same kind of problem. And so we could use the same financing mechanisms and, we cut RFPs, requests for proposals all the time for power plants. And there's no reason we couldn't do similar things and we do it for renewable generation. We could do it for CDR projects. We could do it for albedo projects. There's nothing that says we can't finance it. It's just a question of, is there a marketplace? Is there a way to make it happen faster? And to me, that's always been the problem, is marketplace issues.
And Matt, along the marketplace idea, is Austin on a cap and trade or tax and dividend kind of program?
Neither. We're in Texas. We're in a pretend there's no problem program,
Yes.
which makes us an exception as a municipality. And so the carbon pricing that we did is I would call it it's a budget. It's just a community self-imposed budgetary tolerance. So we value emissions more than zero, maybe not a lot more, but more than zero. So we picked a budgetary mechanism to create money for that purpose. We apply it to our worst power plant, and then we buy cheaper, cleaner power from the market when we can. And to everybody's surprise, that was a lot of the time.
Amazing.
So it's cheap. It's super cheap.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. But the circumstances are not universal. So it's very rare that a municipality is in a position to actually do something like that when the state and federal governments are not supporting the effort.
Well, a lot of these movements, start locally and they become best examples for.
Well, that's kind of my hope. So we're on track to be carbon neutral on a net basis by 2035. I actually think we'll do it by 2030, but we're on track for 2035.
Right.
And I'm part of a small group of people who are agitating to get the city's goals to continue to grow, where it's like, okay, we're net neutral, but we really should look at our historical burden and we should take care of that. I think it's feasible for us to do that by 2050 if we can find CDR projects that are priced right, and then make that just part of our habit. We just keep adding these things to our portfolio of capability. And just as a demonstration project, because I think it'd be fantastic if Austin could hold up a hand and say, hey, we took care of our emissions, we took care of our historical emissions, and if you guys want to pay us, we'll take care of some of yours too. Yeah,
by the way, along those lines, there are a lot of oil wells in Texas, and I heard that 45Q rebates were going to go up to $85 per ton. So
yeah, that should make. Right. Oh, that's just it. Texas, it's a cruel irony that if we ever get carbon markets working, Texas will clean house in that arena. And it's terrible irony that Texas is such a progenitor of the problem, but is going to benefit in fixing it. So.
Oh yeah, I mean you pump a lot of CO2, and that can be a good start. So I wonder if that can count as a municipal component in future years.
No, there's a cruel tragedy that our Texas politicians are working so hard to prevent progress on this arena when we benefit from it so tremendously. I don't claim to understand that.
Yeah, well, with 45Q, $85 per ton, and I heard that in euros in Europe, the carbon price was approaching 50 euros per ton. It changes the world in terms of the economics.
Well, but we bought down, so the city was able to buy down a third of our emissions for $3.30 a ton.
Nice, good price.
That's so
low hanging.
We are not trying very hard, not really at all in Texas yet, that we have so much cheap emission that we can.
Well, we need to soak up all of those cheap credits so that we can start getting to the real business at hand here.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. There's no way, I haven't figured out. If you have great insight into how to monetize these as credits, that'd be great. They're kind of soft. Most of the credit organizations don't want to certify emission avoidance from power plants. And so I haven't come up with a way to monetize it. So right now, this is just a pure ledger expense to us.
We actually have a 45Q under CCS. I'm on the board of Bright Energy Storage, which has developed a cryogenic CCS method that ultimately can qualify for the $85 per ton.
Oh, yeah. Those kind of projects could qualify. And that's exactly it. I just, I would love Austin to get to the point where we're sending out RFPs to do this kind of thing. So maybe you and I've talked very much a lot here for newcomers, so I apologize. So, but I'd be very interested in talking with you further to.
Yeah.
Brian, could I just ask a question? Did you say $80 per ton of CO2?
Perhaps 85. I believe it's at 55 now for the 45Q.
Because
is it 50? I think the 45Q permits up to 50 now. So that's my understanding that's where it caps out in the current legislation. Yeah.
Right. But there is a direct discussion of $85 per ton. Go ahead.
Yeah.
For large volumes.
Large
volumes. John McDonald is waiting to be admitted.
All right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So is John McDonald here or?
Yeah, I think he's getting online. Just give him a couple minutes to get online. If you have to actually, whoever's the host needs to let him into the room.
Our host seems to have disappeared.
Yeah, but no, there is a host still for the call, or we wouldn't be having a call. They just need to go to participants and then admit John McDonald.
I just admitted him. I don't know how that happened, but
that's fine.
Brilliant. Well done, hello, John.
He made you host, Ron, and he just didn't tell you.
Right.
Anyhow, apropos the conversation about CDR, because we sometimes creep into this area, the regenerative agriculture has huge potential as an offset, and possibly down to $30 per ton of CO2. It could be made to fly on a global scale or just on a local scale. But we could start that going by getting cities around the world to offset their emissions by paying to get regenerative agriculture going either locally or in some other country where they would benefit hugely from where $30 per ton to get your the necessary amount of CO2 out of the atmosphere per hectare. It's a few tons per hectare per year to get to start reducing the level in the atmosphere.
Yeah, and actually the kelp forest can do 30 or 50 tons per hectare per year. And so to add regenerative mariculture to your list. Yeah,
and do the same in the oceans. And now we've got something that your city can do, which can offset their legacy CO2 as well as their current emissions. So that's brilliant, and this is all going to must be part of our plan, what I've called Plan D, which is the combination of A, B, and C, such as to actually improve food productivity and water water management improved, and all sorts of things can be improved to restore the planet to a really good state for people like Greta Thunberg and her generation. Yeah, I've forgotten what thread I was going to revise, but let's see if there are any other issues and introductions, because I think Ron Baiman, have you introduced yourself before I arrived, or?
Not formally, no. So I'm Ron Baiman. I'm a self-described heterodox or radical economist for many years. In the U.S., I'm now working outside Chicago at a university, teaching there, and I've gotten into climate change more seriously in the last few years. So I'm a relative novice in this area. But I'm very, very happy to be here, and thank you all for inviting me. And I really hope we can do something. I'm a grandfather now, so I have a strong concern about this. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. I liked your idea of triage.
Yes.
Would you like to expand on triage and how you came to call it triage?
Oh, thank you, John. I think I was concerned that the term geoengineering has these very kind of megalomaniac ramification implications for people. Connotations would be the right word. That first, and I think has raised, caused people a lot of concern that the engineers are going to try to, refabricate the planet, re-engineer the planet. Whereas, what we're really talking about is a stopgap, something to prevent even worse things from happening as we deal with the core problem, the fundamentals of things that are causing this. So I thought triage was a good term to get that across, that this is a kind of a Band-Aid effort to do something to give us more time, essentially, to work on the fundamental causes.
My only problem with using triage is that some people you give up on, some people you ignore, and some people you take care of. So hopefully we won't give up on the Earth's health. But I agree that that sort of idea that it is an emergency is important.
Yeah, I would hope. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is our plan C, which we hope to phase out as quickly as possible, but it is a Band-Aid to allow plan D to succeed, which is the, if you like, do people like this idea of the plan A, B, C, D? Yeah. Okay, and because you,
I would hope people wouldn't want to give up on the planet. I mean, So anyway, I'm sorry.
yeah.
And we might consider that the triage is between different slices of the gigaton carbon pie. So in other words, maybe we need a dozen wedges, or maybe we need 20 wedges. But and of course, decarbonization leads out. But once we've done, we're triaging these gigaton methods, and of course, the war is, or I should say, the requirement for sustaining civilization is that we get to a healthy climate.
I have heard it described as a three-legged stool, that you need the drawdown of carbon dioxide, the transfer to carbon-free energy sources, and the climate restoration for any of it to work.
Yeah, we like to talk about it in terms of decarbonization first, of 50 to 80% of civilization, the drawdown of the rest, and of course, ecosystem life support, including sea ice in the Arctic, Greenland, and I'll add the kelp forests in the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah, my own thinking on this, I must say, is, over time, when I became concerned about it as an issue, I was drawn to the Citizens Climate Lobby just because policy-wise, I thought, any price above zero will make a lot of things happen. And so I've been trying to work that at both ends, at the federal level and then at the municipal level. And I've had a lot more success at the municipal level. But as you learn more, I, of course, been finding it's like, oh, we've delayed too long. No, CDR's got to be a significant slice by. And now it's like, oh, man, these tipping points, they seem like real things. we gotta get to delay. Delay is always the most expensive project most expensive component of any engineering project. So,
or Matt and Ron's benefit, I think it was Robert Tulip that came up with the term tourniquet. Part of triage is to have a tourniquet.
Yeah, no, that's probably the right triage analogy.
Responding, decarbonization may only be 10% of the solution, but the reality is that for us to get most of people on board with it, they don't want to let fossil fuel off easy, that you can just keep on polluting. So the reason we have to say decarbonization first is primarily to say that we're committed to reaching a carbon-free economy in the future. And otherwise, people would look upon CDR as just a way to let the big polluters off scot-free. And so I think it's a moral hazard to not include decarbonization, even if it only does 10% of the job.
Could I just add? I'm thinking. I mean, I agree, Brian, and that moral hazard argument is of course a major argument. But how about net decarbonization? With that, because I just mentioned here in the chat the global thermostat. This method of getting DAC effectively using natural gas electricity generation, and the folks. I mean, you may all be familiar with this, but the Peter Eisenberger and Graciela Cicholniski, who, by the way, designed the Kyoto Protocol, are envisioning this as a way to get enough energy into developing countries to kind of square the circle of increasing energy production, increasing development, increasing standards of living, and draw down carbon at the same time. So, I see Barbara shaking her head.
Well,
you go ahead.
Surely solar powers, surely renewables are the way to go. Because if you're going to be burning fossil fuels, you should actually be burning the dirtier fossil fuels to keep the parasol up. Yes, so
that's an interesting argument.
22. If we decarbonize the wrong way, then it will tip us. I think I mean, I'm not a physicist, but I'm really concerned that will tip us far enough that the methane dragon or bomb or whatever you want to call it will be released. And then I don't know, we need a plan Z then, or scary.
We need to emphasize the methane dragon, particularly in the context of sea ice thickening, because between sea ice thickening and summer cloud cover, we need to be freezing that Arctic to keep the submarine, permafrost.
Right. I in the long run, for absolutely, renewable energy, there's no question. The issue here is, how do you manage the transition in a speedy, in a fast enough way, and raise standards of living, in order to actually get support for that transition. So I did, and you could do this actually. They use excess heat, so it could use any any industrial process that generates excess heat, you can run a direct air capture. And I don't know, natural gas is the easiest because it has the lowest emission of the fossil fuels, but you could probably do it with, if you wanted to pump up a lot of aerosols, I don't know that it would be quite as efficient in terms of direct air capture. And, the negative part would be less negative, but
Well, even having the existence of these technologies, even if they don't become scaled or deployed at scale, is important, because then every industry can play. We're not saying you're not part of the solution. You just have to not emit. Just don't make the problem worse. And there are technologies to point to. So it's like you can play. Now it's just a question of, can you play competitively?
Right.
And then, so it's the moral hazard's removed as soon as you put a reasonable price on it and tell
Right.
everybody that they can play, and you have demonstration technologies that make that true. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and by
Yeah.
the way, the magnitude of the submarine permafrost is around 60 gigatons of methane, which corresponds to roughly 6,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent on a 5-year timescale. So it's
yeah,
an
it's a
amazingly huge methane dragon.
such a big number.
Yeah, and the other thing is the infrastructure, the embedded infrastructure. It's like 55 trillion or something in fossil fuel infrastructure. So if you can find a way to just adapt it temporarily to do direct air capture and utilize the infrastructure, like synthetic fuels is an example of that. Liquid synthetic fuels. Using the same infrastructure instead of which again gives us time, right? It just takes decades to rebuild an entirely electric or renewable energy infrastructure. So
I just like to point out that Texas
Yeah.
is still mining CO2 rather than capturing CO2 and using industrial waste. So, like I say, we're not even trying yet. So if you can point to are people familiar with Net Power? They have a 50 megawatt power plant outside of Houston, the alum cycle power plant. So I'm excited. They've announced two additional plants that they're going to build. So that technology seems to be progressing. And so, this gives us an excuse to say, all right, no new natural gas plants, unless they're alum cycle net power plants, then that's okay. Again, it just, natural gas can play. They just have to play nice.
I noticed a word that Brian used for the Arctic, an ecosystem. I think if we emphasize that we're trying to save the Arctic ecosystem as an ecosystem, we might get more pleasurable response from the.
We already have the charismatic megafauna, whether it's the polar bears or the walruses, toppling the island. I don't know if anyone saw that movie, but watching the walruses, falling off cliffs because of the lack of substrate was really emotionally wrenching. And from that perspective, we've got the case from an emotional appeal standpoint, and there's nothing like an ecosystem with charismatic megafauna to make it happen if we can actually do it. And I think there's a good basis for that. So let's articulate it and then get the public relations message out as well.
Yeah, so make sure your wind generators have got suitable polar bear scarers or.
Not a problem. The blades are well above the height of a polar bear, so I don't think we'll have much trouble.
But it's the kind of thing we need to say, that we've thought of the implications for the life there.
No polar bears were frozen in the formation of this island of sea ice.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. We've had just about an hour and a half, and it's my bedtime. So, is there any?
I get to start our days.
I think to conclude, we're getting even more convinced that a planetary restoration can be done. It can be done safely. It can be done in such a way as to benefit just about everybody on the planet, and all creatures as well. So biodiversity, and if we do something cool, global cooling as well, we might be able to save the Himalayan glaciers, which are providing water supplies for a billion or more people.
By the way, we might be able to get more ecologists on board by calling it planetary regeneration. It may not be the exactly same climate as it was before, but hopefully a healthy climate. So I'll continue to explore that framing.
Yeah, okay. If you could send me something on that, Brian, that would be brilliant, or send us to the group.
Happy to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that
I
I'm very optimistic after this meeting, more than I was even because it was I was quite optimistic by the Healthy Climate Alliance meeting on Saturday. Everybody was seemed to finish on a positive note.
Is there a recording of the Saturday meeting by any chance?
I think there might be. I'm not sure. Mark sometimes remembers and sometimes doesn't.
Okay. But if there's a way to point to it, let me know. Mark whom?
I did.
Which Mark was recording?
Mark Hibbert.
Okay.
I did send some notes on the meeting.
Very good.
On the positive side.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I just saved the chat because I've been made the moderator, so I'll send that out to the group.
Excellent. Thank you.
Right, well, thanks everyone very much. Sorry I haven't been able to speak at the meeting, but I really appreciated it. And I have recorded the discussion, and we'll share it with you shortly. So,
thank you, Robert. It's good to see you. Good morning.
So thanks again and goodbye.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Bye-bye,
Enjoyable.
everyone.
Bye.
Nice
Robert.
to meet you all.
Bye.
Bye.